My name is Laura, and I am 32 years old. I still remember the confusion washing over me when I realized I was the only one in my family not invited to my sister Jessica's $800,000 wedding. The painful explanation from my mother cut deep. You will ruin her moment. Despite my heart shattering, I simply said, I understand. Instead of staying home crying, I decided to fly to Italy alone. Little did I know that my fake wedding photo in Tuscany would go viral and change everything. I am about to share a story that broke my heart but also brought unexpected magic. Let me know where you are watching from, and hit subscribe if you believe in the power of self-healing. Growing up, Jessica and I had what I thought was an unbreakable bond. With a 5-year age difference between us, I naturally fell into the protective big sister role. I can still picture her toddling after me on chubby legs, her eyes bright with admiration, constantly saying, "Lawa, wait for me." It was adorable how she couldn't pronounce my name properly until she was nearly 4. Our childhood home in suburban Connecticut was comfortable, spacious, and always immaculate thanks to my mother, Nancy. Mom was a former local beauty queen who never quite let go of her pageant days. Even for a simple grocery run, she would be perfectly coiffed, makeup flawless, outfit coordinated. Image was everything to her. First impressions are the only impressions that matter, she would remind us while inspecting our outfits before school. My father, Robert, was successful in commercial real estate development, which provided our family with financial stability and certain privileges. His demanding career meant he was often absent, traveling for business deals or working late. When he was home, he preferred peace over confrontation, typically deferring to my mother on family matters to avoid what he called unnecessary drama. From an early age, the differences between Jessica and me were apparent. I inherited my father's practical nature and independent streak. I preferred climbing trees and going on adventures rather than playing with dolls. Appearances weren't important to me, much to my mother's dismay. I was smart, stubborn, and uninterested in conforming to traditional expectations. Jessica, on the other hand, was the daughter my mother had always wanted. With her naturally blonde hair, delicate features, and sweet disposition, she was like a little doll. She loved pretty dresses, ballet lessons, and being the center of attention. My mother saw her as the perfect canvas, a Nancy too to mold in her image. "Laura, why can't you be more like your sister?" became a familiar refrain throughout my childhood. It wasn't said with malice, but rather with genuine confusion, as if my mother truly couldn't understand why I wouldn't want to be more feminine, more agreeable, more like them. Despite our differences, Jessica and I were close. I taught her how to ride a bike when she was 6, spending hours running alongside her in the driveway until she could balance on her own. The look of pride on her face when she finally pedaled away without my help remains one of my favorite memories. We baked cookies together every Sunday afternoon, creating a spectacular mess in Mom's pristine kitchen. Jessica always insisted on using extra sprinkles and food coloring, resulting in bizarrely colored but surprisingly delicious treats. Dad would make a big show of tasting them, declaring them masterpieces no matter how they looked. When Jessica was in 2nd grade, a group of older girls began teasing her about her lisp, which she was sensitive about. Without telling anyone, I confronted those girls during recess, standing firm with my hands on my hips, telling them they'd have to deal with me if they bothered my sister again. Jessica never knew I did this, but the teasing stopped. As Jessica entered middle school, I noticed subtle shifts in our relationship. She began caring more about what her friends thought and less about spending time with her uncool older sister. I was hurt, but understood it as a natural part of growing up. What I didn't realize then was that this was just the beginning of a much larger transformation. Jessica started gravitating toward the wealthy, popular crowd at school. These were kids from the most affluent families who wore designer clothes and went on exotic vacations. Initially, I thought it was just a phase, but Jessica seemed determined to fit in with them. "They only like you because Dad has money," I told her once, frustrated after she canceled our movie night to attend a party with her new friends. "You're just jealous because no one invited you," she shot back, the words stinging more than she probably intended. I remember watching her get ready for that party, methodically applying makeup she was barely old enough to wear, picking out an outfit that looked like it belonged in a magazine. There was a new calculation in her eyes, a deliberate quality to her movements that seemed too adult for her 13 years. "Do I look like I belong?" she asked, twirling in front of the mirror. "You always belong, Jess," I said. You don't need to try so hard. She rolled her eyes at me, but there was a moment, just a flicker, where I saw uncertainty cross her face. Then it was gone, replaced by the polished smile she was perfecting, and she was out the door. Looking back, I should have recognized that moment. As the crossroads, it was the beginning of Jessica's transformation from my sweet little sister into someone increasingly concerned with status, appearance, and belonging to a world that valued surface over substance. The gap between Jessica and me widened significantly when she started college. She chose her mother's alma mater, an expensive private university known more for its social connections than its academics. I had gone the opposite route, attending a state school with an excellent arts program using scholarships and part-time jobs to pay my way. During her freshman year, Jessica's social media transformation was complete. Her Instagram became a carefully curated display of brunches at exclusive restaurants, weekend trips to Aspen or the Hamptons, and selfies with her equally polished friends. Each photo looked professional, filtered to perfection, with captions that seemed designed to inspire envy. Living my best life, she would write beneath a photo of herself in a yacht, champagne flute in hand, surrounded by people I didn't recognize. It was during her sophomore year that Jessica met Taylor Williams, the son of a banking family with old money and older connections. Their relationship progressed quickly, with Taylor becoming a fixture at our family holidays. He was handsome in that generic privileged way, with perfect teeth and the confident demeanor of someone who has never heard the word no. My parents adored him immediately. He comes from such a good family, my mother would gush after he left. His mother serves on 3 charity boards, you know. While Jessica was building her picture-perfect life, I was pursuing my passion for photography. After college, I turned down a stable marketing job to freelance, capturing landscapes and street scenes that spoke to me. My parents viewed my career choice as impractical at best, irresponsible at worst. Photography is a hobby, Laura, not a career, my father said during one particularly tense family dinner. You need something reliable. I am reliable, I countered. I pay my bills. I'm building a portfolio. I'm just not doing it the conventional way. There's conventional, and then there's smart, my mother added, exchanging a look with Jessica that made my stomach knot. The first major fracture in my relationship with Jessica came when she turned 21. She planned an extravagant birthday celebration at a rooftop bar in Manhattan with a guest list that apparently included everyone except me. I only found out about it through a mutual childhood friend who assumed I was going. When I confronted Jessica about it, her explanation felt rehearsed. It was a space issue, Laura. The venue was really limited, she said, not quite meeting my eyes. So limited that you invited people you barely know from your sorority but not your own sister. That's different. It was about networking, she replied, as if that explained everything. Later that week, I saw the photos online. There seemed to be plenty of space on that rooftop, and plenty of people I didn't recognize living it up with my sister. The realization that Jessica had deliberately excluded me hurt more than I wanted to admit. Still, I tried to maintain our relationship. I would call regularly, send her funny texts, invite her to my exhibits, or on photography trips. Most of my efforts were met with delayed responses or polite excuses. I'd love to, but I'm so busy with internship applications, she would say. Or, that sounds fun, but Taylor and I already have plans with his family. The only times Jessica seemed interested in maintaining our connection were when she needed something. Help with a paper, advice about a disagreement with a friend, a ride from the train station when no one else was available. I always said yes, hoping each interaction would bring back some semblance of our former closeness. My photography career was slowly gaining traction. I had started selling prints online and getting small commissions for local events. When I planned a 2-week trip to the Grand Canyon for a landscape series, I invited Jessica, thinking it might be a chance for us to reconnect away from the pressures of her social circle. Camping. In the actual outdoors, she had laughed. Thanks, but I'll pass. Besides, the desert would ruin my skin. It was as if we were speaking different languages now, valuing entirely different things. While I sought authenticity and natural beauty, Jessica seemed to prize exclusivity and appearance above all else. The final confirmation that we were living in separate worlds came with my first real photography exhibition. After months of preparation, I had secured a small gallery space to showcase my work. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a legitimate milestone in my career. I sent my family formal invitations 6 weeks in advance. The opening was scheduled for 7 o'clock on a Friday evening. By 8:30, none of them had arrived or called. When I finally reached my mother around 9, her explanation was casual, almost dismissive. "Oh, honey, didn't you get my message? We're at the Williams Yacht Club event. Taylor's father is honoring Jessica for her charity work with the Family Foundation. We simply couldn't miss it. I'm sure your little show is lovely, though." I hung up before she could hear the catch in my breath. Looking around at the modest gathering of friends and fellow artists who had come to support me, I made a decision. I would stop expecting my family to be there for me. It hurt too much to keep hoping. That night, a local art blogger attended my exhibition and wrote a favorable review. That review led to a commission from a small travel magazine, which became a turning point in my career. None of my family ever saw the exhibition, asked about it, or acknowledged what it meant to me. It was as if it had never happened. Jessica called me on a Tuesday morning, her voice pitched higher than usual with excitement. Taylor proposed. She practically screamed into the phone. 5 carats, Laura. The ring is absolutely stunning. She proceeded to describe in minute detail how Taylor had arranged a private dinner on a rooftop overlooking the city with a string quartet playing their song and thousands of roses surrounding them. He had gotten down on one knee, just as the sun set, presenting her with a custom-designed platinum ring with a flawless center diamond. "It's perfect," she gushed. "Just like we always dreamed." I didn't recall ever dreaming about elaborate proposals, but I pushed that thought aside. "I'm happy for you, Jess," I said sincerely. Despite our differences, I wanted her to be happy. My parents hosted an engagement celebration the following weekend at their country club. It was an opulent affair that felt more like a networking event than a family celebration. Men in bespoke suits and women in designer dresses circulated under crystal chandeliers, champagne flowing freely. Jessica floated through the crowd like a celebrity, her left hand perpetually extended to show off her ring. Taylor stood proudly beside her, the perfect complement to her polished beauty. They looked like they had stepped out of a luxury magazine advertisement. I wore the nicest dress. I owned a simple black cocktail dress that suddenly felt woefully inadequate among the sea of labels and statement jewelry. My mother noticed immediately. "Couldn't you have found something more appropriate?" she whispered when I arrived. "This is an important night for your sister." "This is what I have, Mom," I replied, trying to keep my voice light. "I think Jessica will be too busy showing off her ring to notice my dress." Mom pressed her lips together disapprovingly but was quickly distracted by the arrival of Taylor's parents. I spent most of the evening on the periphery, nursing a glass of champagne and making small talk with distant relatives who invariably asked why I wasn't married yet or when I planned to get a real job. The next morning, Jessica and our mother began planning what they repeatedly called the wedding of the century. The budget started at $500,000 and quickly ballooned to $800,000 as they added extravagant element after extravagant element. "We're flying in peonies from Japan," Jessica informed me during one of our increasingly rare phone conversations. "And the cake is being designed by that baker who does all the royal weddings in Europe." To my surprise, Jessica asked me to be one of her bridesmaids. For a moment, I felt a surge of hope that perhaps our sisterly bond wasn't completely lost. That hope dimmed when she immediately launched into a list of requirements. "You'll need to get highlights, of course," she said matter-of-factly, "and we should discuss some meal planning to help you drop at least 15 pounds before the big day. The dresses are Vera Wang, and they run small." I swallowed my initial reaction. "Jess, I'm happy to be in your wedding, but I'm not changing my appearance. I'm comfortable with how I look." "This isn't about you being comfortable," she replied, irritation creeping into her voice. "This is about my perfect day. Everyone needs to fit the aesthetic." Despite my misgivings, I agreed to attend the bridesmaid dress fitting the following month. It was a disaster from the moment I arrived at the high-end bridal salon. The other bridesmaids, all Jessica's sorority sisters or friends from her social circle, were uniformly thin blonde and intimidatingly well put together. They greeted me with air kisses and forced smiles that didn't reach their eyes. The dress Jessica had selected was a form-fitting blush pink gown with a low back and minimal support. When I emerged from the dressing room feeling self-conscious and uncomfortable, the salon fell silent. "Oh," my mother said, her disappointment evident in that single syllable. Jessica circled me slowly, her expression growing increasingly distressed. "This won't work at all," she declared. "The photographer will have to retouch every single photo you're in." "Maybe we could find a different style that's more flattering for Laura's figure," the salon consultant suggested diplomatically. "Or maybe Lara could find a different figure," one of the bridesmaids muttered, triggering muffled laughter from the others. I stood there on the pedestal, fighting back tears as they discussed my body as if I weren't present. The final straw came when my mother pulled me aside after the fitting. "Have you considered a small cosmetic procedure?" she asked quietly. "Dr. Harrison does wonderful work, very natural looking. It would be our gift to you." "A gift," I repeated incredulously. "Having a surgeon cut into my body so I look better in Jessica's wedding photos is a gift?" "Don't be dramatic, Laura. It's just a nip and tuck. Everyone does it." "I don't, and I won't." The tension escalated at a family dinner 2 weeks later. Jessica was reviewing the wedding timeline when she casually dropped a bombshell. "So we've decided to restructure the bridal party," she announced, not looking up from her planning binder. "Given the balance issues with the groomsmen and the overall aesthetic we're going for, we think it's best if Laura steps down as bridesmaid." The table fell silent. My father cleared his throat awkwardly but said nothing. My mother nodded approvingly. "Balance issues?" I asked, my voice steady despite the hurt blooming in my chest. "Yes, it just makes more sense visually," Jessica replied. "No hard feelings, right? You'll still be there as a guest, which is actually better because you won't have all the bridesmaid responsibilities." I pushed my chair back and stood up. "Let me get this straight. I'm not physically attractive enough to stand next to you at your wedding, but you still want me to attend as a guest so I can watch from the audience." "Now you're just making this difficult," Jessica said with an exasperated sigh. "It's one day, Laura. One perfect day that I've been planning my entire life. Why can't you just support me instead of making everything about you?" In that moment, I realized how completely our relationship had deteriorated. This wasn't my little sister anymore, but a stranger who valued appearance over everything else, including our bond. "I'll support you," I said quietly. "But I won't let you make me feel less than because I don't fit your idea of perfection." I tried to mend things in the weeks that followed, calling Jessica several times and even sending a peace offering of old childhood photos I had discovered. My attempts were met with increasingly brief responses or outright silence. When we did speak, every conversation seemed to reveal another way I had disappointed her or our mother. The final nail in the coffin came at the lavish rehearsal dinner 2 months before the wedding. I had an important client meeting that afternoon, which ran late, causing me to arrive at the 5-star restaurant 45 minutes after the scheduled start time. When I slipped into the private dining room, apologizing quietly, Jessica's glare could have frozen fire. "Nice of you to finally join us," she said loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. "We've already done the toasts and gifts." "I'm sorry, the meeting ran over and then traffic was terrible," I explained. "There's always some excuse with you, isn't there?" she replied. "Some reason why you can't just show up properly for once in your life." What followed was a public dressing down about my unreliability, my inability to prioritize family, and my apparent determination to undermine her special occasions. I sat in stunned silence as years of resentment poured out of my sister in front of Taylor's entire family and all their friends. When she finally finished, the room was uncomfortably quiet. I stood up slowly, placed my napkin on the table, and walked out without a word. No one, not even my parents, called after me. 3 weeks passed with no contact from Jessica or my parents. Then social media began filling with excited posts from friends and extended family about receiving their formal wedding invitations. Elegant cream envelopes with gold calligraphy and wax seals containing hand-painted invitation suites that reportedly cost $70 each. Day after day, I checked my mail. Nothing came. I told myself it was a delay or perhaps mine was being delivered separately. Another week went by. Still nothing. Finally, I called Jessica directly. It took 4 attempts before she answered. "I was wondering if there was a problem with my invitation," I said, trying to sound casual. "Everyone seems to have received theirs already." There was a long pause before Jessica responded, her voice cool and detached. "There isn't a problem, Laura. You're not receiving an invitation because you're not invited." The words hit me like a physical blow. I'm not invited to my own sister's wedding. After that scene you caused at the rehearsal dinner, what did you expect? Taylor's family was horrified. His mother specifically asked that you not attend. I didn't cause a scene, I protested. You publicly humiliated me, and I walked away rather than making it worse. See, this is exactly why you can't come, Jessica said with a sigh. You refuse to take responsibility for anything. You insist on being difficult. You won't conform to the simplest requests. The wedding party has a specific look, a specific energy. You just don't fit, Laura. You never have. I felt as if I couldn't breathe. So because I won't get highlights or lose weight or have plastic surgery, I can't attend my sister's wedding. It's not just that, she replied, her voice hardening. It's everything about you. Your attitude, your inappropriate career, your insistence on being different. My wedding needs to be perfect. You simply don't belong in that picture. I hung up without another word, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. Less than an hour later, my mother called. I almost didn't answer, but some desperate part of me hoped she was calling to fix this, to be the mother I needed. Jessica just called me in tears, she began without preamble. I can't believe you're trying to guilt her about the wedding guest list. Mom, she uninvited me from her wedding, I said, my voice breaking. Her own sister. Well, what did you expect? You fought her on every aspect of this wedding. You refused the dress alterations, the hairstyling, everything that would help you fit in. Now you expect to just show up and stand out like a sore thumb? I expected to be accepted by my family as I am, I said quietly. Is that really so much to ask? My mother's sigh was heavy with disappointment. Family works both ways, Laura. Sometimes we make sacrifices for the people we love. Jessica has dreamed of this day her entire life. Why would you want to ruin that for her? How would my presence ruin anything? Because you refuse to blend in, she snapped. You insist on calling attention to yourself with your opinions and your alternative lifestyle. This wedding will have important people attending, people who matter to your father's business, to Taylor's family's connections. We need everything to be perfect. I went to my parents' house the next day, determined to speak to them face to face, to make them understand how deeply they were hurting me. My mother met me at the door with her arms crossed. Your father and I were just discussing this situation, she said, leading me into the living room where my father sat uncomfortably in his favorite chair. Situation, I repeated. Is that what we're calling it when parents allow one daughter to exclude the other from her wedding? Now, Lara, my father began in the placating tone he always used during family conflicts. We understand you're upset, but we need to consider what's best for Jessica right now. What about what's best for me? What about the message you're sending by allowing this? My mother's expression hardened. The message we're sending is that we support our daughter on the most important day of her life. I'm your daughter too, I said, my voice small. And you're making this all about you as usual, she replied sharply. Jessica deserves her perfect day without worrying about what inappropriate thing you might wear or say or do. You would just end up taking attention away from her. So, I'm a distraction, an embarrassment. My mother looked me directly in the eyes and delivered the blow that would haunt me for months. You would ruin her moment, she said flatly, and we can't allow that. My father remained silent, looking down at his hands. His failure to defend me, to even acknowledge the cruelty of what was happening, was its own kind of betrayal. I don't remember driving home. I just remember sitting in my parked car outside my apartment, staring blankly ahead as tears streamed down my face. The complete rejection by my family, the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, created a pain unlike anything I had experienced before. Word spread quickly through our extended family and social circle. A few cousins called to express their shock and sympathy, but most remained silent, unwilling to risk their own invitations to the social event of the season. A couple of aunts suggested I should just make the changes Jessica wanted, as if my physical appearance was something I owed to others. It's just hair color and a few pounds, my Aunt Linda said dismissively. Is it really worth missing your sister's wedding over? Even some friends who initially expressed outrage gradually shifted to suggesting compromise. Could you maybe just wear what they want for one day, my childhood friend Diane suggested. Then at least you'd be there. What hurt most was the realization that so many people thought this was a reasonable request, that my compliance with superficial standards was more important than my dignity or the principle that family should accept you as you are. The weeks that followed were some of the darkest of my life. I withdrew from social activities, declined invitations, and buried myself in work that I struggled to focus on. Each night, I would lie awake replaying my mother's words, questioning everything about myself. The lowest point came when I found an old photo album while cleaning out my closet. It was filled with pictures of Jessica and me as children, smiling, hugging, clearly adoring each other. In one photo, 6-year-old Jessica was missing her front teeth but grinning widely with her arm thrown around my shoulders. On the back in my childish handwriting, I had written me and Jessie forever best friends. I sat on my bedroom floor and sobbed until I had no tears left, mourning not just my exclusion from the wedding but the loss of the sister I had loved and the family I thought I had. 3 days after my breakdown with the photo album, my best friend Amanda came over unannounced carrying takeout and a bottle of wine. "You aren't answering my texts, so I'm invoking best friend intervention privileges," she announced, pushing past me into the apartment. She took one look at my unwashed hair sweatpants and the general disarray of my living room, and her expression softened. "Oh, honey," she said, pulling me into a hug. Over dinner, I poured out everything that had happened with Jessica and my parents. Amanda listened without interruption, her expression shifting from shock to outrage. "Let me get this straight," she said when I finished. "Your sister is having an $800,000 wedding, but she can't find room for her only sibling because you won't get plastic surgery and dye your hair." I nodded miserably. "And your parents are okay with this?" "More than okay. They're enabling it, supporting it even." Amanda was quiet for a moment, swirling the wine in her glass. "So what's your plan? Sit here and cry while they all party without you?" "I don't have a plan," I admitted. "I'm just trying to process the fact that my family basically disowned me over highlights and 15 pounds. "That's not a plan, that's wallowing," she said firmly but kindly. "You need to do something that reminds you of who you are, something that has nothing to do with their shallow values." "Like what?" A slow smile spread across Amanda's face. "Where have you always wanted to go but never made it happen?" Without hesitation, I replied, "Italy. I've wanted to photograph Tuscany since I was in college." "Perfect," Amanda exclaimed. "The wedding is when Memorial Day weekend." I nodded, not seeing where she was going with this. "Then that's exactly when you should be in Italy. Instead of sitting home feeling sorry for yourself or worse, trying to crash a wedding where you're not wanted, you should be living your best life in Italy." The idea was simultaneously terrifying and exhilarating. I'd never traveled internationally alone before. My savings were modest, certainly not enough for a luxury vacation. But the more I thought about it, the more right it felt. "I could actually do this," I said slowly, feeling a spark of excitement for the first time in weeks. Amanda grabbed my laptop and placed it in front of me. "Start looking at flights. Right now. I'm not leaving until you've at least begun planning." That night, I booked a flight to Florence, departing the day before Jessica's wedding. I found a small, affordable apartment in the city center through a vacation rental site. It wasn't fancy, but it had a tiny balcony overlooking a quiet street and was walking distance to the major attractions. The next 6 weeks were filled with preparation. I applied for an expedited passport, researched photography locations throughout Tuscany, and picked up extra freelance jobs to build my travel fund. Each step I took toward this journey felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. My parents called exactly once during this period, ostensibly to see how I was doing, but really to gauge whether I planned to cause any trouble around the wedding. When I calmly informed them I would be in Italy, my mother's relief was palpable. "That's probably for the best," she said, not bothering to hide her approval of my absence. The morning of my departure arrived with a mixture of nervous energy and determination. As the plane took off, I watched America disappear beneath me, feeling both terrified and liberated. For the first time in my adult life, I was completely on my own, heading towards something I had chosen solely for myself. Landing in Florence was like stepping into a dream. The golden late afternoon light bathed the terracotta rooftops in a warm glow as my taxi wound through narrow streets toward my rental apartment. The city had a tangible sense of history and beauty that immediately began healing something inside me. My apartment was exactly as pictured, small but charming with worn wooden floors, simple furnishings, and that perfect little balcony. After dropping off my luggage despite my jet lag, I couldn't resist exploring the neighborhood. The narrow streets opened unexpectedly into piazzas, where locals and tourists mingled. The scent of fresh bread and coffee hung in the air, and everywhere I looked there was another breathtaking building or sculpture. I found a small cafe and sat at an outdoor table ordering my first authentic Italian cappuccino. As I watched people stroll by, engaged in animated conversations or simply enjoying the evening, I realized no one was looking at me with judgment. No one cared what I was wearing or if I fit some arbitrary standard of beauty. I was simply another person experiencing this magnificent city. That night I slept better than I had in months. The next morning, Jessica's wedding day back in the States, I deliberately avoided checking social media. Instead, I joined a walking tour where I met a diverse group of travelers from around the world. Among them were two sisters from Australia, a retired couple from Canada, and a solo traveler named Eva from Sweden, who quickly became a companion for museum visits. It was Eva who introduced me to Marco, a local photographer who occasionally gave informal tours to fellow photography enthusiasts. Marco was in his early 40s with salt and pepper hair and an infectious passion for his city. When he learned I was a photographer, he offered to show me some hidden spots perfect for capturing the authentic Florence beyond the tourist attractions. "Everyone takes the same photos of the Duomo and Ponte Vecchio," he said in lightly accented English. "But Florence has thousands of perfect moments waiting to be captured if you know where to look." The next day, Marco took me on what he called his photographer's tour, guiding me through quiet residential neighborhoods, up hidden staircases to breathtaking viewpoints, and into tiny workshops where artisans practice centuries-old crafts. "Photography is not just about beauty," he told me, as we paused on a small bridge over the Arno River. "It is about finding the truth of a place or person. The most powerful images show us something honest." His words resonated deeply. All my life I had been told that truth and beauty were somehow at odds, that my authentic self needed modification to be acceptable. Here was someone suggesting the opposite, that truth itself was what created meaningful beauty. Through Marco, I met Sofia, an elderly woman who taught traditional Italian cooking classes in her home. I spent a delightful evening learning to make pasta from scratch, alongside travelers from 4 different countries. Sophia treated us all like family, correcting our technique with good-humored scolding and insisting we eat until we could barely move. "Food is love," she declared, refilling my plate despite my protests. "When someone cooks for you, they are saying, 'I care about your happiness, your satisfaction, your well-being.'" In her small, warm kitchen, surrounded by strangers who quickly became friends, I felt more accepted than I had in years within my own family. One night, after a week in Florence, Marco invited me and several other photographer friends to a hillside vineyard outside the city. We arrived just before sunset and watched as the landscape transformed in the changing light. As the stars emerged in the clear night sky, we shared wine and stories while overlooking the twinkling lights of Florence below. "Why Italy?" Marco asked me as the others engaged in a separate conversation. "Of all the places in the world, why did you choose here?" I hesitated, then decided to share the truth. I was uninvited from my sister's wedding because I didn't fit their idea of perfection. Instead of staying home feeling rejected, I decided to come somewhere I'd always dreamed of visiting. Marco was quiet for a moment, then raised his glass. "To finding yourself in the place you were meant to be, not where others think you should be." We clinked glasses, and I felt a profound sense of rightness wash over me. Here, thousands of miles from home, I had found people who valued authenticity over conformity, connection over perfection. The next day, inspired by our conversation, I made a bold decision. I extended my trip by another week and booked a train ticket to the Tuscan countryside. Marco suggested a small hilltop town called Montepulciano, famous for its wine and stunning vistas. He even connected me with a local friend who rented rooms in her centuries-old family home. As the train carried me through the rolling hills of Tuscany past vineyards and olive groves, I felt a sense of adventure and possibility I hadn't experienced since childhood. For the first time in months, I wasn't thinking about Jessica's wedding or my family's rejection. I was fully present in my own journey. Montepulciano was everything Marco had promised: and more. The medieval town perched dramatically on a limestone ridge, its ancient stone buildings seeming to grow organically from the hillside. My host, Francesca, welcomed me into her home, a 400-year-old stone house with thick walls that kept the interior cool despite the warm May sunshine. On my second day there, while exploring the town's winding streets, I passed a small boutique with a vintage clothing display in the window. Something caught my eye, a flash of ivory satin among the colorful dresses. I stopped and peered closer. It was a 1952 style wedding gown, simple yet elegant, with a sweetheart neckline and a tea-length skirt. I found myself walking into the shop almost without conscious decision. The elderly shopkeeper smiled warmly as I approached. "That dress in the window?" I said hesitantly. "Could I see it?" She nodded enthusiastically and retrieved the gown, holding it up for my inspection. It was even more beautiful up close, the satin soft with age, but still luminous, the construction impeccable. "Try," she insisted, gesturing toward a velvet-curtained fitting room. I should have said no. I had no reason to try on a wedding dress. But something about the dress this moment, this place far from home, made me nod and take the gown into the small changing area. The dress fit as if it had been made for me, skimming over my curves without constriction, the length hitting perfectly at my calves. When I emerged from behind the curtain, the shopkeeper clasped her hands together in delight. "Bellissima," she exclaimed. "Like destiny." I stared at my reflection in the shop's gilt-framed mirror. I had never been the type of woman who dreamed of wedding dresses or perfect days. But standing there in that sunlit shop thousands of miles from home, I felt a strange sense of reclamation. "I'll take it," I said impulsively. The shopkeeper's eyes widened. "For wedding?" I shook my head, surprising myself with my answer. "For a photography project." That evening, I told Francesca about the dress over dinner in her kitchen. Instead of finding my idea odd, she was immediately supportive. "There is a beautiful abandoned villa just outside town," she said excitedly. 16th century, with formal gardens still partially maintained. It would be perfect for such photographs. "But I can't just show up and start taking pictures," I protested. Francesca waved away my concern. "The caretaker is my cousin. I will speak with him. Now you will need flowers, shoes, perhaps a veil." Within 24 hours, what had begun as an impulsive purchase became an elaborate plan. Francesca's network of family and friends rallied around my project with enthusiasm that both surprised and touched me. Her cousin not only granted permission to use the villa, but offered to open rooms that were normally closed to visitors. A neighbor who arranged flowers for the local church created a simple but beautiful bouquet. Another friend, a former hairstylist, insisted on doing my hair. Marco, who had remained in contact via text, asked if he could join me in Montepulciano. "I would be honored to photograph this," he wrote. "This is not just pictures, this is a statement." And so exactly 1 week after Jessica's wedding day, I found myself standing in the overgrown but still magnificent gardens of a Renaissance villa, wearing a vintage wedding gown, my hair styled in soft waves, holding a bouquet of local wildflowers and roses. Marco moved around me, capturing images as the golden late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the stone pathways and illuminated the ancient facade of the villa behind me. "Now throw the bouquet," he suggested, "but throw it up, then catch it yourself." I laughed at the idea, but did as he suggested, tossing the flowers high into the air and then catching them with a genuine smile of delight. Something about that action, that moment of giving something to myself, rather than waiting for it from someone else, felt profoundly liberating. For 2 hours, we created images throughout the villa and its grounds. Some were traditional bridal poses, others more artistic or playful. In each, I felt increasingly comfortable, increasingly myself. This wasn't about pretending to be a bride, I realized. It was about celebrating my own journey, my own choices, my own beauty on my own terms. As the sun began to set, casting a magical rosy glow over the stone walls of the villa, Marco captured what would become the most significant image of the series. I stood alone on a balcony overlooking the Tuscan landscape. My profile illuminated by the setting sun, the vintage dress glowing almost golden in the light, my expression one of peaceful confidence. "That's it," Marco said, softly lowering his camera. "That's the one." Later that evening, reviewing the images on Marco's laptop, I was struck by how happy and authentic I looked. There was no forced smile, no stiff pose, just a woman comfortable in her own skin, surrounded by beauty she had chosen for herself. "These are remarkable," Laura Marco said. "They tell a powerful story." On an impulse, I selected the balcony image and posted it to my Instagram account with a simple caption. When I wasn't invited to my sister's $800,000 wedding because I wouldn't change my appearance, I decided to throw my own solo celebration in Italy instead. Sometimes exclusion is just redirection to where you're truly meant to be. I closed the laptop and thought nothing more of it as I enjoyed a final dinner with Francesca and her family, who insisted on celebrating my Italian wedding day with homemade limoncello and stories that had us laughing until well past midnight. The next morning, I woke to my phone buzzing continuously with notifications. Overnight, my post had exploded. The image had been shared thousands of times with comments pouring in from around the world. Women and men alike were responding to the story, sharing their own experiences of family rejection, body shaming, and eventual self-acceptance. "You are my hero," one woman wrote. "I wish I'd done this instead of starving myself for 6 months to fit into my sister's bridesmaid dresses." "This photo made me cry," another commented. "The peace on your face is what I'm working toward after years of trying to please my critical family." By that afternoon, several online publications had picked up the story. My Instagram followers jumped from a few hundred to over 10,000 in less than 24 hours. My inbox filled with messages from podcasters and even a few television producers asking for interviews. Among the flood of notifications was a text from Amanda. "Oh my God, you've gone viral, call me." When I did, she was practically screaming with excitement. "You're everywhere, Laura. Everyone is talking about the woman who took her own wedding photos in Italy after being uninvited from her sister's wedding. This is insane." I was still trying to process the unexpected attention when my phone displayed an incoming call from my mother. With a deep breath, I answered. "What have you done?" she demanded without preamble. Her voice was tight with fury. "Hello to you too, Mom," I replied calmly. "Do you have any idea of the embarrassment you've caused? People are calling us, asking if it's true that Jessica uninvited you because of your appearance. Her in-laws are horrified by the publicity." I simply shared my truth, Mom. I didn't name names or give details. "You didn't have to. Everyone knows who we are. Jessica is devastated. You've completely overshadowed her wedding with your attention-seeking stunt." The old me would have apologized immediately, would have taken down the post and retreated into shame. But something had fundamentally shifted during my time in Italy. "I'm sorry if the truth makes you uncomfortable," I said firmly. "But I'm not sorry for finding my own joy after being rejected by my family." "You always have to make everything about you," she snapped. "You couldn't just let your sister have her moment." "You made it about me when you decided I wasn't worthy of witnessing my sister's marriage, unless I changed my appearance," I replied. "I'm hanging up now, Mom. I'm still in Italy, and I'd rather enjoy my last few days than argue." I ended the call before she could respond and turned off my phone. Despite the knot of anxiety in my stomach, I also felt a surprising sense of peace. For perhaps the first time in my life, I had stood firm in my own truth without backing down in the face of my mother's disapproval. Over the next few days, the viral response to my photo continued to grow. A popular women's lifestyle site asked to interview me via video call. A body positivity podcast invited me to be a guest. Several couples who were planning weddings reached out to ask if I would photograph their ceremonies, specifically requesting the same authentic, judgment-free approach they saw in my self-portrait. What had begun as a personal act of healing was evolving into something much larger, touching a nerve in our culture around beauty standards, family acceptance, and the courage to choose oneself. When I finally returned to the United States, I had job offers waiting, including a request to write an article about my experience for a major publication. My photography website traffic had increased tenfold. But most meaningful were the messages from people who said my story had helped them find courage in their own lives. "I canceled the nose job I was getting for my cousin's wedding after seeing your post," one young woman wrote. "I realized I don't want to remember her special day as the reason I changed my face forever." These messages convinced me that sharing my story publicly had been the right decision despite the family fallout. What had begun as private pain had somehow transformed into a source of strength and connection with others who had experienced similar rejection. 1 year after my impromptu Italian wedding photoshoot, my life had transformed in ways I never could have anticipated. My photography business was thriving with a special focus on body-positive portrait sessions and authentic wedding documentation. Clients specifically sought me out because they wanted someone who would capture their true essence rather than trying to force them into conventional molds. I had saved enough to rent a small studio space in the Arts District, where I also displayed prints from my Italy trip, alongside stories of self-acceptance submitted by followers of my now substantial social media presence. The collection, which I called Freedom, drew visitors from across the city and beyond. My journey of healing had not been easy or straightforward. In the weeks after returning from Italy, I had started therapy to address the deep wounds left by my family's rejection. My therapist helped me understand that their inability to accept me was a reflection of their limitations, not my worth. Family systems often resist when one member begins to change or challenge the established roles, she explained during one particularly insightful session. Your refusal to conform threatened the entire structure they had built. Through therapy and the supportive community that had formed around my story, I gradually built a sense of self that was no longer dependent on my family's approval. I created new traditions, with what Amanda jokingly called my chosen family, a tight-knit group of friends who accepted and celebrated each other exactly as we were. I had limited contact with my parents and none with Jessica in the months following my viral moment. The silence was painful but also allowed space for my own growth. I sent birthday and holiday cards, brief and cordial, but did not call or visit. My father occasionally sent equally brief text messages, but my mother and sister maintained their silence. I had almost resigned myself to this new normal when 6 months after the wedding, I encountered Jessica unexpectedly at a coffee shop in our hometown. I was visiting to photograph a childhood friend's newborn baby and had stopped for an afternoon cappuccino, a habit I had brought back from Italy. I almost didn't recognize her at first. Gone was the perfectly coiffed, immaculately dressed woman I had last seen. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, her face free of makeup, her designer clothes replaced by jeans, and a sweater that looked like something I might wear. We locked eyes across the shop, both freezing in surprise. After a moment of hesitation, I nodded in acknowledgement, expecting her to ignore me or leave. Instead, she picked up her cup and walked slowly to my table. "Can I sit?" she asked, her voice lacking its usual confidence. I gestured to the empty chair across from me, too surprised to speak. For several minutes, we engaged in awkward small talk, carefully dancing around the elephant in the room. She asked about my work. I asked about her honeymoon. Finally, Jessica set down her cup with deliberate care. "I saw your photo," she said quietly. "The one from Italy." I waited, unsure where this was going. "You looked happy," she continued. "Really genuinely happy. And beautiful in this way that had nothing to do with all the things Mom and I were obsessed with." I swallowed hard. I was happy. For the first time in a long time. Jessica looked down at her hands, and I noticed she wasn't wearing her massive engagement ring, just a simple gold band. "My marriage isn't what I thought it would be," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "All that planning, all that money, all that focus on creating the perfect day, and none of it prepared me for the actual marriage. Taylor's family has all these expectations, and his mother is constantly judging everything I do, and sometimes I feel like I can't breathe." The pain in her voice was so familiar, so similar to what I had felt trying to meet our own mother's expectations, that I felt a surprising surge of empathy. "I'm sorry, Jess," I said sincerely. "That sounds really hard." She looked up, tears brimming in her eyes. "I keep thinking about when we were kids. How we used to make those ridiculous cookies and not care how they looked. When did I stop caring about fun and start obsessing over appearances?" "Probably around the same time Mom convinced you that your worth was tied to how you looked and who approved of you," I said gently. Jessica nodded slowly. "I miss you," she said simply. "And I'm sorry. What we did, excluding you from the wedding, it was cruel and shallow and just wrong." It wasn't a perfect apology. It didn't address all the years of growing distance, all the small rejections that had preceded the final big one, but it was a crack in the wall that had formed between us. "I miss you too," I admitted. The real you, not the perfect image you've been trying to maintain. We talked for nearly 3 hours that afternoon, beginning the slow, tentative process of rediscovering each other as adults. Before we parted, Jessica asked if she could see more of my Italy photos sometime. It was a small request, but it felt like a significant opening. My relationship with my parents remained more complicated. My father eventually reached out with an awkward invitation to lunch, where he struggled to apologize without actually acknowledging what had happened. "Your mother and I may not always understand your choices," he said carefully, "but we never wanted to hurt you." It wasn't enough, but I recognized it as the best he could offer from within a marriage and a worldview that had never taught him how to validate feelings or admit mistakes. I accepted his olive branch for what it was, establishing a cautious, limited relationship that protected my hard-won peace. My mother proved more resistant to change. When we finally spoke months after my coffee with Jessica, she remained defensive. "I only ever wanted what was best for both my girls," she insisted. "Everything I did was out of love." "Love shouldn't be conditional on changing who I am," I replied. "Real love accepts it doesn't demand transformation." She had no response to that, and our relationship remained strained, consisting mainly of brief, superficial interactions at family events I now attended on my own terms, with clear boundaries in place. The greatest lesson of my journey came not from these family reckonings, but from what I discovered about myself in their absence. In losing what I thought I needed, I had found what I truly required: self-acceptance, authentic connection, and the courage to define success and happiness on my own terms. My viral moment had faded, as all such moments do, but it had left behind something far more valuable than fleeting fame. It had connected me to a community of people on similar journeys, seeking to free themselves from external judgment and find their own definitions of beauty, success, and love. The vintage wedding dress now hung framed on my studio wall alongside the balcony photograph, not as a symbol of what I lacked, but as a reminder of the moment I chose myself, the moment I recognized that I did not need anyone else's approval to celebrate my own life. Sometimes the most painful rejections lead us exactly where we need to go. Being uninvited from my sister's wedding had ultimately invited me into a fuller, more authentic version of myself. The family I had desperately sought approval from had inadvertently given me the gift of freedom by showing me that their approval was not necessary for my happiness. And that Italian wedding photo that went viral, it still hangs in my living room, not to remind me of what I lost, but of everything I found when I dared to stand alone. Have you ever been excluded from something important and found unexpected joy on your own path? Instead, I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please like and subscribe to join our community of authentic living. Share this with someone who might need to hear that sometimes rejection is just redirection to something better. Thank you for being here with me today, and remember that you are enough exactly as you are, no alterations needed.